Hello and good evening. We are happy to be joining you this evening, and today we have a very special guest, Elle. I have followed her for a long time and have always been very inspired and encouraged by her information that she shares, and so I'm so excited to have her tonight. So I'm gonna let her introduce herself, tell you a little bit about her and her background and what she does.
Yeah, hey Lauren, thank you. Thank you so much for letting me have this conversation with you tonight. I'm excited to talk about it. It's heavy material, but I know that a lot of moms are walking through what we're getting ready to chat about, and just want to offer some help and encouragement. And so I am a DV advocate, among other things. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a mom, and but I also advocate a lot on social media and locally here, coming alongside just other moms who are going through abuse, and then specifically who are experiencing what's often referred to as either like parental alienation or DV by proxy, but they're experiencing some next level, severe levels of violence between their children and themselves. And so, yeah, I advocate for that online, and I just started a coaching program and offer parental alienation consulting
Mhm.
sessions starting this past summer. So you can go to elrenestudio.com if you have any questions or want to check that out.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
so, as we're talking about this, like we were talking today, this is another horrendous side of abuse that a lot of people don't know about if you're a people helper.
Mhm.
Well, I would say people know about it, but it's something you need to be very aware of. And then a lot of moms watching, I know this is probably stuff that you've experienced, and it's from what I have not experienced personally, but from what I understand, it's a really I can't imagine one of the deepest horrors of your life is I loved well, I didn't love, but it was a great way the way you described it to me today. I'm trying to find the exact verbiage, but it's a just where you are completely isolated, alienated from your kids. What was the exact verbiage that you used? I'll let you go into it.
Yeah. Well, I usually refer to this process. It's really just the psychological manipulation of a child in getting them into showing an unwarranted fear, or disrespect or hostility towards a parent and other family members. And it's really just psychological child abuse and family violence. A lot of times they use the strategy of brainwashing, and we can go into more detail later, but it's really an intentional brainwashing to sever or disconnect the basic trusting relationship between the protective parent and the children.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's just really heartbreaking to see mothers walk through that, after you've already escaped domestic abuse and like have your children turned against you and to feel that pain. And they do. It happens in domestic abuse over and over again. And not only that, they keep them from you. And it's just, yeah, talk about a heartbreaking experience as a mother. And you're the innocent party just trying to do the best you can, and it's hard.
Yeah. Yes. And I feel like I continue to meet more and more women as like I said, I kind of started advocating for women able to walk alongside of them when they were simply leaving a violent marriage, and then coming across more and more women who are experiencing this next level child psychological abuse. And um, yeah, it's brutal. It's tragic, but there's also some real tangible ways to combat it and to help heal your family still.
Yes. And so today we're going to talk about that and kind of start with what are some practical steps? Because I mean, I can imagine, and in moms that I've talked to, it feels like that's hopeless. Like, what do you do? Is there any hope? And I'm excited that you're here tonight to share that there is hope. There is practical steps you can take. And so maybe we can start with what is the first things we can do if we find ourselves in that situation?
Yeah. So let me just start out with just a little bit of context, a little bit of background history on this, because I know for a lot of moms, if they are or have been walking this dynamic, and they are starting to recognize something is changing with my kids. Like, that's usually where it starts. It's like, what is happening? Something there's a whole other ball game that's starting to happen, and I'm losing this this bond or this relationship that I've had with my kids since they were babies, and I'm just trying to make sense of what it is. And so a lot of times moms will start to Google or start to research, like, what is it that I'm experiencing. And so really kind of what we're going to talk about tonight is usually referred to, right or wrong, but it's referred to as usually parental alienation. It can be referred to as domestic violence by proxy or DV by proxy. Sometimes it's referred to as coercive control. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's referred to as pathogenic parenting. I would say those are probably the four most common terms that you're going to find if you are trying to research. So I just wanted to throw that out there just to kind of make sure we're a little bit all on the same page. And
Yeah.
any mom who's watching and who's been researching or just trying to find out that information, that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. There's a lot of controversy on the term, so we won't. I'm just gonna like that's for another day, another conversation. But the dynamic, this abusive, violent dynamic that's happening, that they're all kind of referring to in one way or another, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And so, um, really, in order to determine is there alienation, and then what, or is there, this child psychological abuse that's going on, what's happening, you kind of need to determine, um, kind of look to see in this family, you're going to see these three main profiles. You're going to see the abusive parent, a targeted or protective parent, and a targeted child. So I'm probably going to use those terms throughout the evening. And so, again, the assumption is the protective parent and the targeted child has always had a safe relationship, a trustworthy relationship. It's a normal range relationship. There can be arguments, there can be, different challenges, of course, but that's in a normal range kind of parent child relationship. Um, there, um, there hasn't been any allegations of abuse or danger or anything like that in the past history, usually leading up before the separation or the divorce. And then you start to see post separation, post divorce, this relationship starts to unravel. And and so um so you'll see, like, the abusive ex is, the short version is basically manipulating and brainwashing the child to to fear the protective parent. Um, and so I guess we can jump into what are some ways that you can tackle that. Um, I think the first step is trying to determine where are you on the um, alienation or violent spectrum here, or that part of the journey, because how you're going to handle it is going to, at maybe 6 months out of separation, is going to look different than maybe 2 years or 6 years or so forth. And then it depends a little bit on how old your child is. um, so I would just encourage, if you're in the earlier stages and you're catching this, or starting to see this change, um, then there are different things that you can do. So you can choose to go the legal route. You can, of course, get some of the different family court professionals involved. There's counselors, there's evaluators. Um, and so oftentimes you can have your lawyers, or mediator, whoever, add things into like a custody agreement, um, discussing things like, the two of you can't disparage one another. Um, Basically, you're kind of setting up some guidelines to um, attempt to hold the abusive ex accountable from this kind of brainwashing, manipulation, and damage. Um, so, those are some preventative things. oftentimes the abusive ex is not going to, respect that. But there are continued things that you can do in court of filing motions and filing contempt. Um, so those are just a few legal options that you'd have. And then the day-to-day interactions with your children. Um, I would just encourage you, like, there's a lot of power in your moments that you have with your kids. The
Yes.
good news is that your kids want the truth to be that they can love both parents and both parents love them. Generally speaking, that is what every child
Hmm.
has in them. And so they want that permission, and they desperately want and need to know that you do love them. So anytime that you can have those opportunities to communicate that to your child is going to be a win. You're sowing into that trust, you're sowing into that, into that, continuing into that bond. So again, it kind of depends a little bit on where you are in the spectrum of having this relationship attacked and severed. If it's on the earlier stages where the abusive ex is still trying and the child is kind of confused, um, I would just continue to encourage um, things to do and not to do. So it's usually very tempting to want to communicate your truth, and you want to maybe combat things that they are saying or things that your ex is saying. But 9.5 times out of 10, it is more effective to um, kind of show who you are as opposed to trying to convince them who you are verbally, right? So, and you do, and because oftentimes you have limited contact with your child because you're usually sharing some kind of custody, right? You don't have them 24/7 typically. So you want to maximize the time that you have with your kids as much as possible and making it as positive as possible. So the and I would just say not to minimize little things like just having showing kindness, showing grace, um, coming up with routines, anything that it's really anything that you would normally do in this case, but you're just really combating all the opposite of what they're going to be experiencing at the other home, and helping them to at least question what's being said at the other home, because when they're with you, they're not getting this. They're not experiencing whatever the abusive ex is saying. They're experiencing this very calm, kind, rational, parent, that they do remember. They do have this history with you already beforehand. That's kind of in the early stages. Um, if you're farther down the journey of this, and again, it depends on the age of the child a little bit. Um, Again, there's some similar, I guess, some similarities to that, but you can certainly, I don't know. I guess I would just say, again, not minimizing um, your tone and how conversations that you're having with them. Um, Anytime that you can have like contact points, anytime that you can have time with them where you are rebuilding trust or just reminding them who they are, is again, it's just combating what they're getting from the other parent. So
I
that's
like
just
that. Yeah.
more like the big picture umbrella. I'm trying to there's so many things that we could say, but that's just like a big picture umbrella answer of um, how to combat some of this at the beginning.
I love that. And like, I feel like it's kind of like using our power so many times we want to be like, that's not true. You know what they're saying? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I've heard that that is some of the worst things that we can do, but it's just like
Mhm,
living it out. Like I'm saying, like, that's our power is to be able to take that in control. We can't control what they're saying, but we can control how we act and like showing them
mhm,
grace and kindness and just showing them the truth by our lives. Like, eventually at some point, they're going to have to look back and be able to see the
mhm,
difference in our lives and realize that what their dad said wasn't true. Hopefully, based on how we
Mhm.
live, not versus what we said. So I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, another thing too, I found that it's helpful when other moms are dealing with this. They help to set up a dynamic again where the generally speaking, I mean, it does depend a little bit on how abusive the ex is, but generally, again, the child wants to love and be loved by both parents, even if one of the parents is abusive or they're trying to work through that on their own. And sometimes they um, sometimes the ex exploits this, and then sometimes they are trying to wrestle with how, like, with a lot of guilt for I want to love this parent, and yet I don't like some of the actions of this parent, and they're trying to navigate through that as well. And
Hmm.
so, a lot of times, I know that I know moms who try to help remind them the truth about a person, and so what a person does isn't who they are at their core. And that kind of helps to separate the difference. And it also really combats the all good, all bad kind of splitting mentality that the abusive ex is going to be using against you.
Hmm.
Usually, the abusive ex is, in this case, like mom's all bad. Mom's done X, Y, Z. She's all bad. You have to reject her. She's either too dangerous to have a relationship with, or she doesn't deserve a relationship because of all these things that so called that that mom's done. But it's helping to bring a greater truth to your child of like, well, no, there's not an all good, all bad. And if somebody even does something bad, that doesn't have to mean we completely cut them out. Like it's not our job to punish in that sense. But being able to accept who somebody is while learning how to set boundaries to what they do. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yes.
And so that
Yes.
helps this because again, you have to remember this child is in this atmosphere of such extreme confusion, such
Hmm.
extreme manipulation. Um, and so that's just one little way to help them navigate where they can maybe have a little bit of a space where they still want to love this parent, but being able to help identify when the behaviors are not appropriate. Those behaviors are really bad, and your child does know some basic good versus bad, and they can recognize, I don't think these behaviors are good. And being able to reject that without teaching them to reject the other parent. And because you're communicating that, that is in direct contrast to what that abusive ex is teaching. And so, again, it's giving them another perspective and it's giving them just another opportunity to show that you are different than their other parent.
Yes. Wow, that is so wise. I love that. I would have never thought of like answering it that way, but I was like, wow, that's really really wise. And it's teaching kids healthy boundaries throughout life too, just like how to set those boundaries. And I know I've talked to some moms before that use terms such as gaslighting with their kids. Like, okay, what you did, that's called gaslighting, and just giving them that ability to be able to understand that, and then eventually, hopefully, as if they see these behaviors in their other parent, they know how that's wrong, but they know how to respond to that and set a boundary instead of just being like lashing out, okay, you're bad. You know what I mean? And I really like that perspective. That's just so wise. I love that. I'm like gonna use that if anybody asks me about that. That was amazing.
Good. Yeah.
Um,
I think it's
thank you.
really helpful to remember too for moms who are walking this just in a very similar way that it usually takes time for the mom as an adult to have processed what is this relationship that I'm in, to come to a place where she could accept this is an abusive marriage. What do I need to do about that? What does that say about me? Like, think about all the questions and the time that's required to process that, and then have the courage to set boundaries and to leave. It's very similar to what the children are having to experience, and they're not going to necessarily have. that freedom to just up and leave and separate, obviously, in quite the same way. But they're trying to process it as well. And I think sometimes as the parent, we're like, hurry up. We want you
Yeah.
to see that you're being treated in a violent way, in a way that's not fair. You don't deserve that. There are ways to set up
Mhm.
boundaries, but they haven't processed all that yet. So I also think anytime we can kind of remember that, it helps us to have that compassion and that patience um, for your child. And then again, in the same way that abusive or survivors of spousal abuse needed somebody else to come in and remind them of truth and remind them who they are, their value, and getting re-empowered so that they could recognize the abuse and know how to set boundaries. That is that's also another huge part of your parenting in this kind of environment, because you're gonna because ultimately um, your children are going to have to do the same thing at some level. They are going to have to learn how to push back on some of that violence and set some kind of boundaries. And they can only do that if they are being taught, like you said earlier, about boundaries, if they're being taught about their value, if they're being taught, they're responsible for their thoughts and their feelings and their willpower and their body, and they get to have that privilege. So the more you can have those conversations, doesn't have to be doesn't you don't have to have these conversations in light of their dad, for example. You're just having those conversations in general because it's truth no matter what, and you're pouring all that truth into them. They will make those connections when they need to with their dad. And so that is one way that you are speaking truth and you're empowering them without doing it in a way that maybe others would think is disparaging their dad, or being, disrespectful or anything like that towards their dad.
Yes. That's so good. And that's like that's how God shows us mercy too. Like I'm thinking about by myself, like
Yeah.
coming to our own place of really thinking about how long it took us to understand domestic abuse and to be able to get out or to make that choice. But it's like realizing our children need that same grace and same patience at the same time. So that's a really good perspective to think about that. And I imagine that's how God feels about us. He's like, "Don't you see your value? Don't you see your worth? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to see my daughter be treated this way." But he's so patient and tenderly leads us along and knows that you can't force that, you know? And so it's being the same to our parents and I mean same to our children and walking with them through that and being patient. I just really love how you pull that out. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and I think that's why, it's effective, and that's why sometimes when I there are definitely, like, let's get nitty-gritty, there's some practical, tangible things that you can do to help combat, but also the big kind of, like I say, umbrella answer is, don't underestimate showing kindness, showing grace, loving lavishly, because that is, like you said, that's exactly what God does for us. He wins us through his kindness, he wins us in that same through those um, in that same way, and it's effective. Like it's um, it's obviously genuine, unconditional love, for example, is way more attractive than conditional love, and they are getting conditional love from the abusive ex, and you get to be something different. And at some point, we all want that. So at some point, your child is also going to want that, and and want to rebuild that bond.
Yes, and something that's hitting me too is like abusers, they don't love. They don't know how to love. Like they are broken people. And you got to realize that when your child is with them, they are not being filled up with genuine love. And eventually they're going to be able, like, it's like light and darkness. And it's realizing that Christ in us is light. And that's greater than that darkness, that the counterfeit, the false love. And that when we continue to shine that light in our home and just clinging to him and allowing him to love through us, like that light will eventually overcome the darkness and we just we don't know what time that will be and how long that will take when they make that choice to walk and see the truth. But that was just something that's sitting in my heart, is like just trusting God that his light and he that is in us is greater. So,
Yeah, exactly.
and I have a question here from somebody in
Yeah,
the comment. She says, what do you do when an ex parent has alienated you away from your kids and you already know that your daughter says she wants nothing to do with you?
yeah. Um, Well, a couple things. So the first thing that comes to mind that I also definitely want to encourage, because I hear this all the time from children who were alienated, who have grown to adulthood now. They all, like literally, they all say, "We, I always wanted to love mom." We'll use mom in this case, and I always wanted mom to love me. But you have to remember, the child is in survival mode. Survive. The child is, especially in this case where the child has been um, completely alienated and is dependent on dad. So they that child has to say and do whatever dad's wanting, right? And
Mhm.
so we have to remember whatever those words are that are coming from the child are really coming from the ex. And I know that that doesn't make it feel any better, but it is, I think, important that we try to hold on to that as much as possible so that you don't internalize the rejection, because
Yeah.
that's the temptation when you hear these kind of hateful words and the rejection from your child. I mean, of course, that's devastating.
Mhm.
But if you respond back as if that's true, um, it's just going to shut down any ability to stay connected, any ability to show that love and kindness, like I said. So the challenge, first of all, is every time those kind of comments come in, it's to, you can recognize it's real, obviously, but the greater truth is, no, 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 your child does still love you. Your child does need you. Deep down inside, they are desperately like, please, please, please love me. A lot of times, they actually do know that. And that's why they understand, I have to make sure abusive parent is happy because I'm they've learned they're kind of responsible for that parent's emotions, but they know you are the safer parent. So I can even lash out at you, even though like this is backwards and it's not fair. I know that I can lash out at you. I know I can say whatever I need to because I'm banking on the fact that you love me unconditionally. And so even when I
Mhm.
treat you like that, there's still going to be a love there. So I know that's really backwards and it's hard to remind yourself of that in real time. But I think first of all, that's one of the first things when those messages come in, reminding yourself, there is a scared little child who's really saying, please still love me, please still love me, please still love me. Um, and then again, it kind of depends. I was trying to look at the question here. Like it depends a little bit on if you have contact. If you do have any kind of contact with that child, then again, like I said, send those texts. Meet them at whatever level your child is willing to receive. So sometimes, yeah, they're not going to come over and spend the night, or they're not going to come over and hang out. But maybe they'll meet you for a lunch. Maybe they'll let you take them out. Then do that. Make that as short or make that as positive as possible. So if lunch needs to be 10 minutes because 10 minutes is positive, but an hour would start to go sideways, take that 10 minutes and count that as a win. And then
Mhm.
try to do that as much as possible. If there's no way that your child's meeting you out like that, but maybe they'll receive a text, then send a text. Use those times when you're texting, for example, that where you're just giving and you're just pouring out because you're just trying to reestablish that trust bond that you're safe and you're good, and then you can build from there. Um, so you would so um, as tempting as it can often be, to email or to text or to call or to whatever with, I want to address this distance. I want to, you're not treating me fairly. This is what your parents doing, or, whatever. All those things
Mhm.
might be technically real and accurate, but trying to table that for now because the relationship really can't handle those conversations yet, and just looking for any way to make those connection points and pour into that with, you can trust anything that basically communicates, I'm trustworthy, I'm loving, I love you, I'm trustworthy, I love you. That's what you're trying to look for anytime you can. So that's where I would start. I don't know, I don't know what kind of custody at that beyond that, that this person's asking, but that's definitely a good place to start, and then just rebuild, and then just continue to add to that as much as you can.
That is a really good answer. I'm like, wow, that's I'm like learning a lot here myself too, because so many times we want to valid like keep pointing out, like thinking of people being like, I want to say, hey, this is not true. I love you so much, but just like establishing that trust bond is so important and just allowing them to open up. And that's hard to wait until they're ready to open up and have that. But like knowing that just that patience and being willing to be consistent in building the trust bonds is will go a lot longer, a lot further as far as reestablishing that relationship than trying to control it and trying to get your truth out there.
Yeah,
Love always wins in the end. I truly do believe that.
yeah,
And they will eventually always see who's safe. So yes, moms, I would
yeah,
just keep hoping and keep praying and keep pursuing them and just I don't know. I know other moms that just send their daughters birthday cards or whatever it is, Mother's Day, special occasions, anything at all, and everything you can do. I know one mom. I hope she's. I'm not giving out her name, so I'm sure she won't mind. But on Mother's Day, I know she sends her daughters and sons. I think her daughters Mother's Day cards and just says, I'm really happy that I'm your mother and really grateful for you. And I'm just like, wow, it's really powerful. Like there's just ways to do that and just waiting and praying and for them and don't doubt the power of prayer that God can work in and through their hearts and their lives to see the truth and that he's able to show them that. And when God shows them that, it's a lot more powerful than you trying to pull it out and be like, this is it. So,
yeah. And I think I have a couple quick. I'll try to make them quick thoughts that came to mind when you were saying that. I think one, and this is a process, so I'm in no way minimizing. This does not happen overnight, but as the parent, if you can get to this space of kind of accepting this new type of parenting, I call it
mhm,
non-traditional parenting. Just there's probably a better term for it, but um, when you can kind of accept that this is, I liken it to, other parents end up in kind of non-traditional parenting, whether that's because a child has physical health issues,
mhm.
or disabilities, or there's a handful of different things, of course, that can happen to your children that you weren't anticipating. It's not the like idyllic, you know, I don't know, parenting experience that you
The
anticipated.
Disney World
Um,
parenting.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And and again, not minimizing anybody's experience, and it's a process, but at some point you get to a place where, okay, but it's not what I thought it was going to be, but this is what it is. And so now how do I be the best parent in this situation to this specific kid, because this kid needs that from me, and in this case especially they're not getting it from the other parent. So you
Mhm.
really are the only parent that kind of has the ability to even have the courage and the love to say, okay, this is what we're dealing with. And um and I'm not as hyper focused on, well, this is what it should be, even though that's real and that needs to get
Mhm.
processed. But I think it blesses the children immensely to move away from what it should be and moving into, well, this is what it is. And so now how do I that's what I'm saying, like, how do I meet them at this point the best that I possibly can? I think it just shifts that focus from like the unfairness and the injustice onto in the moment, in the present with my child. Um,
Mhm.
can I share one other thing in my
Yes. Yes.
head when as you
Yes,
were
please.
talking? Um, uh, um, we kind of touched on it briefly earlier, because I think it's so common and it's so instinctive when you have a child who is distrusting you and um, and argumentative or sorry, not debative, but you know what I'm saying. He wants to debate with
Yes.
you, um, and um, and so it feels very instinctive to try to defend yourself or defend the truth. And um, what I've heard again from children who have experienced this, and then as adults, they have said it has been so extra confusing to have that other protective parent want to talk about the truth, um, because they already have the abusive ex who weaponized truth, because that's often what they have been told as children. Oh, the
Mhm.
real truth is that, in this case, mom is dangerous, mom is crazy, mom's doing all these things. That's the real truth. That's the real truth. So truth has already been so weaponized and confusing for them, to then have to, in a sense, have that same type of conversation with a protective parent. It's just so exhausting and so confusing for the child. And so that's
Mhm.
just another reason and something to bear in mind when you instinctively want to, like, no, 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 let me explain to you what's really going on. Let me tell you the history. Let me tell you what your dad's doing, or what I was really doing, or whatever variation of the truth. It's just being able to say, that can get tabled, because the main truth that we're going to tackle is that I'm trustworthy and I love you and I'm here for you.
Mhm.
And again, if you layer that, like, being able to flush out the truth that will come, because probably that child does want to know what the truth about her or his whole childhood and experience truly is, but they need to be ready for it, and not
Yes.
us trying to, like, explain it to them.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all that because I
Mhm.
feel like I have learned so much tonight just listening. I'm like, wow, just soaking all that in. Like that is so true and everything you're saying and it's so counterintuitive to our nature and what we want to do and what we want to say in the moment. And but what you're saying like seeing long term like some women with their daughters and like I'm thinking daughters because it's just like what I
Yeah.
have and what the situation is of people I know
Oh,
it really does rebuild, you know, after a longer time, like, wow, I can see that. And that really is like reestablishing those bonds and everything. So that is so true. And I would just say to any woman too, is to not give up hope, to keep pursuing. You know, Christ does not give up hope on us. He pursues us to the very end, you know, and constantly pours out his love on us, even when we're undeserving. And I think there's an element of grief that goes with all of this. You have to grieve what you've lost. Like
yeah.
that's hard, and it's you know it's not the dream that you had as a mother, and that's hard. And I think as we grieve that and allow Jesus to heal that area of our life, then we're able to allow the love to flow out to us through our kids because we've let go of our expectation, and that's really a hard place to get to, but it's worth it to get there.
Yeah.
I think with the grieving process and getting all that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I share often, um, just using that example you, like, led up to it so beautifully. Um, I have found, like, this dynamic is such an incredibly sacred example of the biggest story and how God relates with us, that, in the very beginning, God had this perfect, trustworthy relationship with his children. The children
Hmm.
completely understood that they were loved and were safe, and the trust was there. And then they got tricked and they got confused and they got brainwashed and um, traumatized and all of that. And God fully understands what alienating, or um, you know, survivors of this kind of family violence, that he knows exactly what you're going through. And
Hmm.
um his example, like we've said, is our example. Um he just continues to woo us back, really, with his kindness. He shows us that he's loving, he shows us that he's trustworthy, he is long suffering, and I think he's joyful in doing that. And it really does become quite a sacred story if you're when you're at that point where you can accept it and see it that way, and it becomes this beautiful, um, beautiful, profound example of love that you're able to show your child because of this um, dynamic that you're in.
Wow, that's so good. I love how you ended that there with like turning the beauty into ashes. Wait, turn to ashes. Ashes.
Yeah.
into beauty.
Yeah.
Sorry, y'all. um, Turning ashes into beauty, and that God truly does. Even this, there's beauty in it, and like I feel like in all things for me, I found it's like knowing Christ is my ultimate hope, and seeing more of His redemption and love in our life is where the beauty is found. And so I really appreciate how you pointed that back to finding Christ in this, and that He is our hope of redemption for us and for our children. So, and He loves them more than we love them. That keeps setting my mind. Just do not
Yeah.
forget, God is pursuing your kids harder than you are pursuing them. So, He is for you, not against you.
Yes. Yes.
And to keep
Beautiful.
pressing into Him and listening to Him, because He knows what's going on in their hearts. He knows everything. And so when you feel that prompting of the Holy Spirit, just to send that text and say, I love you, or just to confirm um, something about them, to say something positive, do it, because God may be working in their heart at the same time. And just be praying over that, and that the Holy Spirit will just lead you in that, and trusting Him through that as you feel those promptings, and different ways to pursue them.
Yeah. Good.
Well, thank you so much for having us here. We have a few questions in the comments, so I'll come back and answer maybe some of them. Um, I'm trying to read them really quick and see what's if yes, I think they can be answered. Um, how far in the reestablishment of mom and kids does this happen? Um, I don't know the answer to how far of reestablishment this happens. Do you? Would you have an answer for that, Elle?
Um, is it pop up? Does that mean I'm not sure exactly what's being asked. How far into the reestablishment? Meaning once they're healed? How long do, or
Um,
I don't know, maybe clarify.
Yes, I think if you can clarify that question, we will be happy to come back and answer that for you. But I also do want to close with tomorrow night is our vigil, and we are really excited about that. And it's not too late to sign up and attend. It will be live streamed here on Facebook. And so we are actually partnering with several other people that will be live streaming it as well. So it's going to be Joy and I are talking about it's going to be a big giant news network among several survivors and advocates, as we all kind of come together for a time to honor those who have been on this journey, and all the pain of it, every bit of it, and to know that they are seen, and that they are loved, and that they are not only seen by us as we are acknowledging one another's journey, but they are ultimately seen by God, and that God sees us. And not only when He sees us, He doesn't leave us. In that, He comes and He fights for us and brings healing and redemption. And so I'm looking forward to tomorrow night. So please sign up if you have not, and if you haven't signed up, it's not too late. Just jump in and join us. But if you want a lantern in your name, if you're not local, you can sign up and do a lantern, and we will read your name off and put it into the lake to honor your journey. So we would love to have you there tomorrow. And thank you, Elle, for joining us tonight. And I will link your website, that if anybody wants to contact you to further talk to you with questions or learn more about your advocacy work and coaching, I'll link that to the top of the comments here. So you can go over there and check out Elle Renee and the work that she's doing.
Sounds good.
All
Thanks for
right. Thank you.
all right. Thank you, Lauren.
Bye.
Night.
Good night.